You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
All right, folks, welcome back. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. Here with me, I have Feliz Leon. He is a freelance journalist, and he's done some reporting on the South recently for the American Prospect. So we're going to be talking to him about some of his reporting, you know, what having those conversations were like and you know, stuff like that. So, Luis, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I love what you guys are doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very well, we hope we're able to do something good. Hope we're able to maybe sow some seeds. So, Luis, you know, you were down here reporting on the Amazon union drive. You had some conversations with workers, had some conversations with the union staff, union officers. And you had some really good articles in the American Prospect. So just talk to us about what was in those articles and maybe some of the behind the scenes stuff, some stuff that was left out, stuff like that. Right.
So, I mean, I want to take a step back and kind of foreground like why I came to Alabama. Right. So I had a month before written a piece for the New Republic covering the Hunts Point strike in the Bronx. And in that article, the essential workers strike, I argued that we were on the cusp of a resurgence of worker militancy. So, and then I had also been covering teachers in Tennessee and poultry workers in Georgia. So I wanted to kind of find like, okay, am I onto something? Is there a surge in worker militancy going on? So that's what brought me to Alabama. I am a firm believer in the democratic idea of talking to people, pulling out a notebook and writing down what they say. The labor reporter Hamilton Nolan said something like this to that effect in the journalism review, the Columbia Journalism Review, when he was describing what's the job of a reporter. So I really wanted to hear on the ground from workers, like what was motivating them, what was driving them. And I know you had earlier on today, you know, Kim Kelly talking about her own experience there as someone from Philly. I'm coming from New York. So I really wanted to hear and understand from people in Alabama what was at stake for them. And one of the things that really struck me was what Kim Kelly mentioned in terms of like the prophetic tradition, let's say. So speaking with Big Mike, like there was a sense of that he was doing this work as a caretaker, right? So he once told me, I didn't include this in any of the articles, but he once told me that, you know, he likened his work to that of a physician that's caring for people. So he said when folks called out for help, he felt as though he was there answering their calling the way that, you know, a physician or someone that's in a caring profession, let's say, would attend to a patient. So I think that really, you know, spoke to me as someone that's not particularly religious. There were strong overtones of a religious conviction of standing with your brother, with your sister, being your brother's keeper.
Yeah, I mean that's really powerful, and that's definitely something that's been tapped into with this drive. I feel like you know, really kind of grounding it in the community, and the community is very religious, and grounding it in the community struggles for justice, connecting it with the movement for Black Lives and things like that. You know, I really think that this drive. Right. All drives really, but I think this drive in particular, there's something really more than kind of wages and working conditions driving folks.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think Kim Kelly put it well when she said, like, you know, all labor struggles, there's something existential in them that people are fighting for. So when people talk about dignity, you know, that's not something that's easy to quantify. It goes beyond, like, a wage obviously has to be dignified in the sense that you can live on your salary. But there are other aspects of, you know, the work that I think are harder to grasp, you know, in numbers. So one of the things, for instance, that I think also stood out and kind of gets at that is that when I was talking to people, a lot of them, you know, were sharing with me, and this came out later in a lot of the reporting subsequent to what I wrote, was that they were debating these conversations about, should I join the union? Should I not, with family? So it was like a very intimate conversation that people were having. And I found that really interesting. I was kind of standing around the Circle K gas station at like 4 a.m, not listening to Big Mike's advice that I might be getting into some trouble by doing that. And I would just, walk up to people while they were filling up their cars with gas or buying an energy drink. And I asked them, like, what does this union election mean to you? And people would tell me, I'm conflicted. My dad was in a union. He's telling me to sign the union card that I needed. And then there were other folks saying, my sister is not for it, but my cousin is. So it's a very contested election. So that was really exciting, to see that like how high the stakes were, that people were literally talking about this at their dinner tables, at night with family, trying to figure out like what to make of what would be in their best interest as workers.
Right. I think that's, that's really, that really kind of taps into a lot of what we've been talking about it being, really, really personal for a lot of these folks. And there's, right. They're hearing a lot of things from a lot of different directions. Right.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And Amazon, I think like we've all heard about the captive audience meetings, but one of the things that was most striking that I write about in my article in the American Prospect is the fact that Amazon had recruited third-party contractors, in Big Mike's words, to basically serve as walking billboards for its anti-union campaign. And that was really heartbreaking, because when I was talking to folks, like they didn't lead, with like, I am someone that was recently released from prison. They would tell me, I'm really happy to be working at Amazon. I'm earning 13. Some people said they were earning 13, others $15 an hour as cleaners. And then towards the end, they said like, look, this is like the best thing that's happened to me since I got out of prison. And it was like, oh, how long was that? Oh, I was released a month ago. So it was really heartbreaking, to hear people's stories and how Amazon was exploiting like those realities that they faced coming out of prison, like the difficulty of finding gainful employment with a criminal record.
Yeah. It's just, it's so gross. And, obviously, I don't think anybody listening would misconstrue our kind of disgust and real the revulsion that we feel at this. I don't think anyone would confuse that with these people that were just released from prison don't deserve jobs. I want to make that clear, and I want to make it clear by illustrating that actually trade unions specifically are one of the only paths to gainful employment for people with a criminal record. A lot of places they won't hire you if you have a criminal record, but trade unions will. And the labor movement is a real road to recovery that is just simply not available for people in other avenues. And, I'm very, very pro giving folks a second chance, especially after they've kind of paid their debt to society, however ill-defined that debt is. But it's really, really gross to take advantage of their vulnerability like that and to use them in that way, because it's not like Amazon actually needed their services in any particular way, that they couldn't have hired them directly as employees themselves. For one, if they had hired them as employees, they would have had to pay them $15 an hour minimum wage, because that's what they say it is. But now they're able to pay them $13 an hour because they're third-party contractors. But they did that to stick vote no pins on them, even though they're not in the bargaining unit and they can't vote. They're just using them as anti-union billboards, like Big Mike said. It's really
right. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And I want to echo what you said, that all workers, deserve fair wages, regardless of whether they have a criminal record or not. Like that's inarguable. But this is a pattern, that employers use, especially in construction. So in New York, we see this all the time with the laborers union serving as a pipeline for folks, to find good, decent wages after, serving time in prison. And sometimes you find companies that hire them, to work on non-union shops and pay them like poverty wages and don't train them properly. And in New York, we've had some horrific accidents of folks, falling from the top skyscrapers because they were not properly trained. So this extends beyond Amazon. We also see it in construction in Tennessee, for instance. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you that it's taking advantage of people that are in a vulnerable position. And right, if Amazon cared, why not hire them directly so they could be part of the bargaining unit? But one thing that Big Mike said, that I think it's important in terms of the organizing that the union is doing in Alabama is that it's not about necessarily just saying like, we're going to just take care of our own. Right. It's like how do we lift up everybody? So if this election is successful and RWBSU is able to enter into a contract with Amazon, those third party contractors, that could be another potential, campaign in order to bring those folks into the bargaining unit. Right. So I think that's a contentious issue that we have seen with 32BJ, SEIU, and the airlines, where you go to an airport, you go even to a hotel, they're wearing Marriott, uniforms, but their employer is a third party contractor. So who's the employer, right? And we saw that with Prop 22 in California with Uber, where it's like, been fighting tooth and nail to make sure that their drivers are not seen as employees, as an independent contractors. So what that struggle that those brothers and sisters that were formerly incarcerated are facing, that's also on the leading edge of challenges that the labor movement is grappling with right now. So that's something that, folks need to continue to pay attention to and be mindful of. But there is broad awareness that employers will use people that are in those vulnerable situations to exploit their needs for employment against unions.
Right. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Was there anything else that all this has been? You mentioned that about Big Mike, but was there anything else that was in the articles that you want to particularly call attention to, or that maybe didn't make the cut, so to speak, but that you found really interesting?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I wanted to, I gestured to the radical history, in Alabama. And I think throughout the show today, which I've been tuning in and out while I'm caring for my kids, you have highlighted, the fact that Alabama has a radical history of labor organizing. So one of the first questions I asked Joshua Brewer when I got there was like, look, I'm looking at all these mainstream reports about this organizing coming out of nowhere. What's up with that? And, the response he gave me, which he's been repeating, he repeated at the rally on Saturday, is that, Bessemer is a union town and will continue to be a union town. And that was really left out of the initial New York Times, article that folks, like a lot of people that were not in Alabama and not following this election, closely. That was the article that kind of came out the gate with like, this is something to watch, right? And they got it wrong. This is the folks that I spoke to, they reference, the steel workers, they reference working in auto plants, and non-union auto plants, which one of the things that I'm curious to get your thoughts on, to kind of even flip the tables here a bit, it's, we know I've been covering Tennessee, like I mentioned, and the UAW, the Governor Lee, was recruited by Volkswagen to do the captive audience meetings. But in Alabama, from my short time there, it seems like the elected officials there are playing a wait and see game, right? Like they're not coming out strongly either for or against. And then today we saw the news, right, that the investors in Amazon are calling for them to back off from their union busting. So how terrible do you have to be as a company that your investors are telling you, hey, back off? So all these things are kind of really fascinating in terms of the longer struggle in the South, to provide families, workers with decent wages, right? So in Tennessee, we there's a really anti-union. The governor, I think it was his 100 days that he went to the plant and held the captive audience meeting, as Chris Brooks reports in Labor Notes. But I haven't seen anything like that in Alabama. So that's not something that I covered in my articles, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on that. And, if other people will pick it up, especially now that the Birmingham DSA folks are going to start that canvassing, which is really exciting. I'm just curious to see what the response will be from the political class in Alabama.
Yeah, well, the political class on both sides have actually been kind of like a wait and see kind of thing. We haven't certainly haven't seen any Democrats coming out really strongly in support. We've seen, Terry Sewell and the Alabama Democratic Party do a couple of tweets, but that's about the extent of it. We've not seen any real support from any politicians here locally, but we've also, to their credit, I guess, if this is to their credit, we've not seen them really attacking. And especially for the Republicans, that is to their credit, I guess, because like you said, that was a real, that was really vicious in Tennessee during that UAW organizing drive, and how in the pocket of the employer, all of the politicians were. So, and I don't know the reason for that. I think there's a bunch of different reasons. I think that I think that a lot of Alabama Republicans are still, to a certain extent, blue dog Democrats. The former Senate Majority Leader, actually, when Alabama had the last time that Alabama had both houses in the legislature held by Democrats was in 2010. And the Senate Majority Leader there was a Democrat, and he just got reelected as a Republican in 2018. Our governor was a Democrat. Senator Shelby was a Democrat. The current Speaker of the House started as a Democrat. So all of these people, they certainly, of course, they weren't progressive. But, David will tell you that he's always had good interactions with Shelby. As far as Shelby's, how Shelby has dealt with the machinists union in particular and the labor movement in general, there's not been a lot of just real vicious kind of anti-union stuff from some of it. Now, of course, from others, it's a different story. Like Jeff Sessions is a bit more, he's a bit more vocally anti-union. Tommy Tupperville is a different breed, obviously, but I think there's some of that. And I think there's another thing, and that is that conservatives hate Jeff Bezos because they don't like the Washington Post. And so, during this organizing drive, we're on a conservative station. And so sometimes I call in every Thursday morning for a segment with the conservative morning show host. And he's kind of like, him and his audience, I think to a certain extent, are getting a bit of schadenfreude from the whole thing. But not out of any concern for the workers, but because of laughing at the harm that potentially it will cause Bezos. So I think those could be two phenomenons that could potentially explain it. But, I don't really know the history of the Republicans in Tennessee very well. And so, I would figure that there'd be a similar dynamic of there being a lot of former Blue Dogs in the Republican leadership. But, I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, no, but that's helpful context in terms of Alabama. So, I think one of the things that I wanted to foreground was, to make sure that to get the history right. So, so I found the generational story, very interesting. So this story of young workers at the Amazon warehouse saying, I spoke to my grandfather. I spoke to my father, who was a union worker. I found that very compelling and very moving, to be honest. I myself come from a union household. My mother worked in a paper mill represented by the U.S. Steel Workers, Local 381. That union emerged after the defeat of Birmingham's mine mill and Swelter Workers Union, which, as we know, offered up a radical multiracial experiment in rank and file militancy. So I guess there was like a personal social history connection to the fight in Bessemer that interested me. So yeah, I mean, I think all eyes are on Alabama right now in terms of what happens with this election. And I'm happy that, we have folks like you doing this great work to shine a light and push back when people get the story wrong.
Yeah, speaking of pushing back, this is a tease for this weekend show. We actually just booked this morning Kenzo Shibata, the functional vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union. We're going to be talking to him Saturday morning because, conservative talk radio hosts hate the Chicago Teachers Union. I mean, I don't know. I mean, well, but the host up there actually has a particular axe to grind against educators, knowing folks in the education area up in Huntsville. He's been a particularly consistent enemy. So that's one of the things. And so, I hope that we can kind of push back on some of the narratives that are put out there here in Alabama. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation. You did a good article, really important reporting on the Gainesville, the Gainesville the 6 Gainesville workers that died here a couple of weeks ago in Georgia. And I was wondering if you could talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, there's definitely, connections between, as you know, Big Mike and Jose, one of the other organizers, that's organized, trying to work with the Amazon workers. They're poultry workers, right? But they're part of a unionized shop. Unfortunately, in Gainesville, the poultry plants there for many years have relied on undocumented labor and have created a climate of fear where workers are not encouraged to come forward when there are any, safety concerns. And what happened at that particular plant, the Foundation Food Group, is that even before that terrible morning when basically this gas leak froze people to death, as they were, trying to find out what was going on wrong with a freezer, is that these problems were long standing and they were ignored. And then tragically, this accident happened that could have been prevented had they cared about human life more than their production goals. So there's definitely a lot of overlap in terms of the struggle of what the Amazon workers are facing. We know that there have been ambulances stationed outside Amazon warehouses because people work 12-hour shifts. So that's what workers have to grapple with without a union. And you can see that the most extreme version of that is what happened in Gainesville, where these workers had, they had no other recourse but to appeal to management. And when management ignored them, they died. So it was a very difficult story to report. I was there, when the families, they held the vigil outside the plant, and the family were visibly, weeping, and just the sorrow was palpable, and people were scared to come forward. I think one of my interviews I held at the airport because people were so scared of coming forward and talking. And after I had stayed around for a bit, is that people kind of warmed up to saying, okay, I trust that he's going to honor, my decision to remain anonymous. Let me tell him what happened. But that was the level of fear. Before this plant accident happened, Gainesville had also had a number of raids, in 2019. And what that kind of anti-immigrant climate creates is the perfect conditions for workers to be exploited. So I'm looking forward to, to future efforts after this campaign between poultry workers, throughout the South that are unionized and these workers that are not, because they are, they share a common struggle. And I spoke briefly to Mike, and some of the other organizers that were poultry workers. But I wanted to keep the focus on their fight in terms of Amazon. But they were also, moved by what happened to those workers in Gainesville.
Yeah. I mean, how could you not be?
Right.
Yeah. Well, Luis, I really appreciate your work. I think it's I think you've done some really good reporting about Gainesville and about the Amazon election. You can find all of those pieces are in the American Prospect, right?
Well, the one about the chemical leak, that's in the Nation, okay. And the ones about the Amazon election are in the Prospect, Gotcha. The American Prospect. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So, that we'll kind of switch the tone just a little bit and to wrap it up, what was it like? What was it like, just personally, being down here in Alabama and Georgia and getting to meet these folks and doing this reporting and the culture down here. I don't know how often you've been in the South before, but you said you were from New York, so just like, what was it like for you personally being on this trip?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was people were really forthcoming about like speaking to me as a reporter, which I thought maybe, wouldn't be the case because I don't know, maybe my accent will give me away that I'm not from Alabama. So people were very, pleasant to work with. I mean, I think workers were scared about Amazon knowing they were talking to a reporter. So they did ask me, oh, please don't use my name or can I be anonymous? But overall, people were willing to be helpful and to speak to press. And that's not always the case in New York and in other places. Right. So that was, that was good. And I think it goes back to that, Southern hospitality, I guess, right? Like just people being very amiable and gregarious and willing to help. In this case, helping this reporter tell a story. Right. So yeah, I mean, I was only there for about, 3 days. And I spent most of my time in the hotel. I would go out at 4 a.m. to the Circle K gas station, interview people, check in with Big Mike and at the gates, and then go back to my room, go back out. I think the only time that I interacted with someone, I think, was when I met up with you to have lunch. That was the only meal that I really ate when I was in Alabama. So I hope to go back sometime and have more of an immersive experience, because this was definitely not that. This was being in the hotel, right, talking to workers, and then, writing up what I heard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you'll have to come back sometime and, get some good Southern cooking and stuff like that. So, you've got my number, so holler anytime you're down and I'll take you somewhere maybe more Southern next time.
Absolutely. I'll take you up on that.